Hello. I'm Dr. Grimm, current Rausch Professor for the Public Understanding of Zombology for the British Empire, seated in Oxford University. I've been asked to create this presentation for you on a rather delicate topic, so before we continue, please ensure that all children, teenagers, mentally subnormal adults, and unmarried women leave the theatre, classroom, or lecture hall where you are watching this. Thank you. I shall not bore you with details of that which we are all far too familiar. Suffice it to say that we survived the zombie wars and entered a bold new future in which the recently deceased have become our domesticated servants. Once the secrets of the dead were understood, they were no match for modern, industrialized and motorized armed forces. The bleeding edge of science and changes to our medical and funerary cultures allowed us to further contain any possible threat to our great way of life. We even managed to tame the untrammeled desire of the dead to consume our flesh. This has, however, led to a woeful amount of complacency amongst the younger and more marginal people within our society. Vandalism of undead property is rife. Juvenile delinquents take undue risks with their lives and even treat the dead as playthings. These are topics for another time. Even more sinister and degenerate than zombie dance parties, happenings and campaigns amongst long-haired deadnicks to end zombie slavery are those who are of a perverted and libertine bent, who engage in acts of congress with the living dead. I'm talking about that which you've only heard whispered rumours, stiffers. At the height of the zombie wars, none of us ever thought that such a thing might happen. We were woefully naive. The human animal is limitless in the level of its perversity. There are those, after all, who prey upon children, animals. There are those who are peeping toms, who force their attentions physically, even when they're not married or lack consent. There are even those of lesbic or Wildian tendency who find amorous delight in the arms of their own gender. There have, alas, always been a small number who would infiltrate morgues, funeral homes, and even engage in grave robbing to fulfill their sick thrills, a minority known only to the most qualified in the psychiatric community. Rum coves to a man, but they were there. This was before the dead could even move, returning to a semblance of half-life in a mockery of humanity. The law, as it stands, is inadequate to address this queer menace. There are laws on the books regarding the desecration of and interference with corpses and with those who are alive and sans consent, but the zombie occupies a hard-to-define legal space, much as they occupy the nebulous nether realm between life and death. In order to put pay to this menace, we need to understand the problem. Moral outrage is not, sadly, sufficient. We must have sound, scientific, and legal grounds in order to change legislation and to enforce the public morality upon this handful of perverts. Being neither alive nor dead, a zombie is not legally considered an object, nor a person, nor even an animal. It is this queered legal status that allows us to domesticate them, purchase them, exchange them, perform experiments upon them, and to cull them where necessary, as with the African Reclamation Project. This legal status is also what allows our more delinquent elements to get away with vandalism of the domesticated undead, and allows the stiffers to pursue the dead for their unnatural, degenerate, and libertine ends. If we define a zombie as an object, we lose many possible protections that can be extended to persons and animals. If we define the zombie as a person, the issue of human rights then emerges about their domestication and ongoing experiments. This is utterly preposterous and would be grist to the dead Nick's mill. If we define them as animals, then similarly there would be laws about cruel treatment, which we already extend to animals. These would then be extended to the undead. This is unsustainable. We must, therefore, I believe, argue for an entirely new legal status for these ghouls, one that will allow us to enforce a moral code of behaviour around them without giving ground to those who cry exploitation or slavery. Poppycock. When it comes to this quandary around the undead, we must examine the morality of it. A gentleman, or even, heaven have mercy upon us all, a woman, given the priapic effects of rigor mortis, who uses a zombie for libidinous gratification is, no doubt, outraging common morality, but we must find a sound basis upon which to make such twisted practice illegal. The undead cannot consent to such actions. They lack the necessary higher brain function. For all some fresh outlier cases have been known to retain some sort of instinctual memory, and even maybe the ability to mumble a word or two, this can, according to Zomco scientists and to my own studies, not be considered anything more than the actions of a parrot, nor a mynah bird, nor a monkey. The undead are repeating your words, echoing your actions. It's imitation without understanding. There are those who use certain devices to assist in their marital conjugals, and it would make no legal or moral sense to ban those objects from that use. If we consider the undead to be objects, then we cannot consider the engagement in intercourse with the dead an outrage any more than we could with those motorized marital devices. You cannot cause emotional or meaningful harm to an object, and if it is your property, then you are entitled to dispose of it as you see fit. Animals then perhaps provide a better model. We do not grant animals full rights. We do recognize the perversity and imposition of sexual congress with animals and the cruelty of the deed to the zoological specimen in question. You cannot, however, be cruel to a zombie. An insensate, flesh-eating ghoul has no meaningful feelings, unlike, say, a border collie, a Siamese, a rooster, or a catfish. Our concern, then, is not, and cannot be, for the status or welfare of the zombie, but rather for the morality, ethics, health, sanity, and safety of the person who abuses the use of the undead. A zombie is, then, more akin to a controlled substance, the abuse of which is our societal concern, as it can lead to harm to others. A zombie might be considered, then, in the same light as alcohol, something that can be abused, something that has certain legal controls and constraints upon its use and sale, and something about which best practices are in the interests of the broader community. Those who engage in such degenerate practices with the undead are at an extreme risk to their own health and to the health of those around them. Social diseases and other pathogens contracted by the undead during their life appear to persist in their unlife, and while pregnancy may not be an issue to be concerned about, venereal diseases certainly are, especially given how many owners any individual zombie may have had. This is of a special concern if the stiffer engaged in this activity is leading some sort of secret double life, in which they may give the disease that they contract to others. Or, if the undead in question was a good-time girl or a bounder or a cad while they were alive, that person can then spread the disease to their wife, their lover, whoever else, their mistress. Despite the relative arrest of decay in undead subjects, they also carry the risks which we associate with the normal, unrisen cadavers. Without a working immune system, but with a human cellular system, the undead carry pathogens such as hepatitis, tuberculosis, cholera, E. coli, salmonella, Campylobacter, and more. In addition, while decay is slowed, it is not 100% arrested, and the undead constantly give off small amounts of cadaverine and putrescine, which can be detrimental to living creatures in sufficient amounts. These are fine in small quantities, but prolonged, extreme close contact with the undead, such as might happen during a regular coitus, can expose an individual to larger and more dangerous amounts over time. In the stiffers of the feminine persuasion, toxic shock syndrome is a very real possibility, given the lack of cleanliness and attention to personal hygiene that the undead have. There we have it then. The case to be made is one of public health, alongside moral outrage. We must control the use and abuse of these ghouls, along the same lines that we control the use and abuse of illicit substances, alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, and so forth. This should satisfy both legal and moral minds in our great nations. I implore you then, ladies and gentlemen, please write to your political leaders, be they congressmen, senators, state legislators, members of parliament, lords, or otherwise. Change the law, create a new legal status for the undead, and allow us to both protect people's legally owned post-life property and the health and moral status of our nations and our young people. If stiffers who may be watching this must engage in such rumly perverse activities, I implore them to please consider the following advice. Use a prophylactic. Clean your zombie regularly with Zomco brand preservatives and antibacterial agents. Ensure your zombie is in a state of good repair, and ration your engagement with your zombie to minimize exposure to pathogens and dangerous toxins. With that, I must bid you farewell. Thank you very much for listening.